Some kinds of power need no banners. They only need to make this morning repeat yesterday. In the Pax Romana, from Augustus to Marcus Aurelius, the long stretch of relative stability trained a reflex in ordinary people to believe order will arrive before anxiety does. That belief was nailed in place by measurement. Mile markers stood silently along the great roads, turning distance into numbers so journeys could be planned, and responsibility traced back. News, too, had its rhythm. The cursus publicus set relay stations at practical intervals, so the empire moved on a schedule. And time itself was corrected. The Julian reform in 46 BCE pulled the calendar back toward the solar cycle. If you want to see how that invisible mold shaped the human mind, subscribe, because the next part begins where few people ever bother to look down. What few people look down at is the roadbed itself. Roman roads were not only for travel, they taught people to anticipate. The surface was built in layers on a firm foundation, slightly crowned for drainage, and often bound with mortar, sometimes even with concrete made from lime and volcanic ash when conditions allowed. When you live inside a network like that, distance stops being a vague fear. It becomes time you can predict. And once time can be predicted, the heart learns to wait within a frame. Taxes arrive by term, goods by season, officials by calendar. Great military roads radiated out from Rome, among them the Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE, so the center became not merely a place, but a beat. From that beat, the mind starts to believe that order can be built, and then maintained. But roads are only the spine. Information is the nervous system. A provincial resident does not need to meet an emperor to feel empire. It is enough to see an official dispatch arrive before rumor. The cursus publicus, a state-supervised delivery service, placed transfer stations at practical intervals along the main highways. In a world without telegraph wires, that speed produced a new psychology. The center could be present from far away. News of taxes, levies, or decrees was no longer hearsay. It was sealed paperwork, arriving on the right route in the right turn. And because this network was tied to administration and the army, it taught a quiet lesson. Power does not need to be hot-tempered. Power needs to keep time. From there, trust in a system becomes reassurance, while also becoming dependence. Once information had a rhythm, Romans wanted space to have a rhythm as well. Here, opus cementitium, concrete mixed from lime, sand, water, and pozzolana, was a silent turning point. It allowed builders to pour and form, letting walls grow as continuous masses rather than mere stacked stone. From that material, arches and vaults stopped being spectacle. They became logic. A good arch redirects weight into outward thrust, freeing the space beneath. People walking under those curved spans learn a subtle lesson. Endurance often lives in what you cannot see, in force, in balance, in geometry. In that sense, an empire is also an architecture of the mind. You trust the structure because it stands through the years. And once you trust it, you are willing to live inside spaces larger than yourself. Large spaces need water, and water must be governed like a public oath. An aqueduct, in technical terms, is not only a high bridge crossing a valley. It is an entire system of channels, pipes, tunnels, and supports that carries water to a main distribution point. When public fountains run steadily, people begin to treat cleanliness as a standard, not a stroke of luck. But standards last only when waste has a path. The Cloaca Maxima, first a drainage channel, later enclosed beneath a stone vault, carried stormwater and eventually urban outflow to the Tiber. In imperial times, public baths and latrines were connected to it. Living in a city with an exit, the mind learns to exit panic as well. A large problem is divided into smaller currents, and each current has its own channel. Water flows through channels. Disputes must flow through procedures. An empire cannot rely forever on personal favors, so Rome forced authority to speak in writing. The 12 tables, issued in 451 to 450 BCE, engraved on 12 tablets and displayed in the Forum, set a psychological principle. Law is not only in the mouths of the powerful, it stands before the eyes of the vulnerable. Though the original text is lost, its legal tradition endured, and later procedures still looked back to those early foundations. When people grow accustomed to having a path to sue, to argue, to seek judgment, they also grow accustomed to a new kind of discipline, the discipline of words and evidence. That is how empire enters the mind, not only through the sword, but through the habit of trusting process. But process needs a back to stand upright, the army. A legion is not merely a combat unit. It is the system that helped Rome conquer and hold territory, turning orders into collective action. Look at the camp. Whether permanent or temporary, Roman troops dug ditches, raised ramparts, and divided space according to an almost fixed plan, so that when night fell, everyone could locate himself. That habit forged a psychology. Safety comes from standardization. In tactics, they learned how to be one, smaller units coordinating tightly, functioning as a team. And when shielding was needed, the testudo fused shields into a living vault, demanding that every step match the pace of the man beside you. Under that shadow of discipline, people understood that order does not arise on its own, it is practiced. Discipline, if it only commands, quickly turns cold. Rome understood a practical truth. A soldier is capital, so there must be a way to return him to the ranks. Battlefield medicine was therefore both care and management. What matters is that standardization reached even the operating space. Many Roman medical instruments were found in sites buried by the eruption of 79 CE. Most famous is the set from the House of the Surgeon at Pompeii, its name tied to the excavated objects themselves. A small blade, a forceps, a probe, each tool required skill and minimum hygienic discipline. And when a soldier believes that, if he falls, a competent hand will still be waiting, courage becomes more durable. Empires also live on quiet professions like these. At a certain point, an empire does not only measure land, it measures days. The Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar in 46 BCE, was a reform aimed at the solar rhythm, so seasons, rites, and taxation could fit within one shared frame. When people grow used to a calendar, they grow used to appointments. A court session, a tax deadline, a festival day, each becomes a mental landmark. Time no longer streams like a river. It is partitioned like a granary. And then Rome went further. It controlled climate indoors. The hypocaust, an underfloor void heated from a furnace below, so warmth could spread, was used in baths and in many houses in the northern provinces. When floors warm at will, the mind learns to believe comfort can be designed, not begged for. In the end, the imperial mindset seeps into something small enough to sit in the palm. In northwestern Hispania, Las Medulas shows that the state could mine gold with hydraulic power, letting metal flow to the center like a kind of tax. Then that metal was standardized into money. Under Augustus, the minting system rested on the aureus and the denarius, with a defined relationship between gold and silver. At the same time, glass blowing, developed in Syro-Palestine in the early 1st century BCE, was believed to travel with craftsmen to Rome and sharply increase output. On the dining table, glossy red terra sigillata, rooted in the Aretine tradition, spread through workshops across the empire like a familiar standard. If you want to go deeper into this psychology of standards, follow the next part. From roads, we move into what taught Rome to think in centuries, not merely seasons. Concrete. Opus cementitium, lime mortar mixed with sand, water, and pozzolana, then combined with rubble, let Roman builders pour and form, rather than simply stack blocks. In 79 CE, Pompeii was buried, yet the ash preserved an active worksite, where modern researchers can see traces of hot mixing, quicklime meeting water, releasing heat, leaving lime clasts that can help cracks close over time. When a material can keep working after a structure is finished, it plants an irresistible idea in the mind. Durability can be engineered. And once people believe in design endurance, they also begin to believe in an order that can be handed down. That faith and endurance does not stop at walls. It rises into an artificial sky. The Pantheon, brick-faced concrete supporting a vast concrete dome, makes the visitor feel as if standing inside a sphere of order. At the crown is the oculus, a circular opening to the heavens that both lightens the load and turns sunlight into a slow-moving timekeeper across stone. Vault architecture teaches a subtle psychology. Weight is not fought with force. It is guided by geometry. You do not see the forces, but you feel them, in the steady silence of space. And when such domes stand across generations, they train a habit of belief. An empire, too, can be a structural work, not merely a reign. What is striking is that Romans did not build only to stand, they built to live with water. Pozzolana, volcanic in origin, mixed with lime to create mortars and concretes that could set in damp conditions, a foundation for bridges, conduits, and harbors. Today, studies of Roman marine concrete suggest that as seawater percolated through it, minerals such as aluminous tobermarite and philipsite could form within the material, adding resilience over time. For those who lived beside such breakwaters, this was not only chemistry, it was an invisible promise. The state's works would not dissolve under ordinary waves. That promise nurtured a long-term mentality. People accept sacrifice in the present if they believe the result will remain. But material is only half the story. The other half is the network, the thing that turns separate projects into a system. The Romans built about 50,000 miles of hard-surfaced roads, stretching from Britannia to the Tigris, Euphrates, primarily for military aims. When a road runs through your village, it delivers a way of thinking. Rome is not far. Roads make distance calculable, and what can be calculated can be audited. Milestones, main routes, secondary routes, all declare that the state dislikes ambiguity. Psychologically, the network creates a new expectation. Problems are not solved by impulse, but by route and sequence. You learn to wait for tax wagons to count the days until goods arrive, and most importantly, to trust that if something is late, the reason lies somewhere inside the system. Once roads existed, Rome set upon them an administrative heartbeat, the cursus publicus. Britannica calls it the most highly developed postal system of the ancient world, with relay stages placed at convenient intervals along the great roads. That matters because it turns power into punctuality. Orders no longer depend on a single messenger. They shift hands like horses change at a station. And when dispatches run steadily, rule becomes less theatrical but deeper. People grow accustomed to paperwork, to seals, to the feeling that the state has a long arm, without needing to raise it high. Living long within that rhythm, the mind learns a strict discipline, trust procedure before promises. This is how empire trains patience and how it measures loyalty. From paperwork, we turn to what keeps a city alive: water. An aqueduct, in the broad engineering sense, is an entire system of pipes, channels, tunnels, and supports carrying water from source to a main distribution point. In Rome, aqueducts could bring water from as far as 92 kilometers away, enough to turn thirst into a problem of governance. And governance had a name. In 97 CE, Frontinus was appointed curator aquarum, supervising aqueducts and the regulations for their use and maintenance. When water flows steadily at public outlets, the urban mind learns to believe life can be distributed fairly, at least in principle. But it also learns a stern lesson: every flow must stay in its channel, or the city slips toward disorder. Water is not only for drinking, it becomes daily ritual. The thermae, public bath complexes, were developed by the Romans to a high degree of sophistication, combining bathing, relaxation, and social life. Step inside, and something unusual appears. In warmth and running water, boundaries of status briefly soften. Not because the empire suddenly becomes equal, but because it understands urban psychology. A comfortable city ignites less easily. A people accustomed to cleanliness grow impatient with negligence. The baths, then, become an instrument of the imperial mindset that turn private need into shared rhythm. When people bathe by the hour, meet along prescribed paths, and converse in spaces sustained by the state, they practice a gentle but durable skill, living together by rule and treating rule as a mark of civilization. Yet sanitation is not only clean water, it is the capacity to remove what is unclean. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest monuments in the Roman Forum, began as an open channel in the 6th century BCE, then was enclosed starting in the 3rd century BCE with a semicircular stone vault. At first it carried stormwater to the Tiber. In imperial times, many public baths and latrines were connected to it. Psychologically, sewers are a blunt reminder. Civilization is not only what we display, but also what we hide beneath. When a city has an exit route for waste and runoff, it reduces the tinder of panic, stench, sickness, accumulated filth. And when cleanliness becomes a standard, people begin to demand standards elsewhere, in law and taxation, and even in the state's honesty. From standards of hygiene, we move to standards of justice. The 12 Tables, issued in 451 to 450 BCE, were Rome's early written law code and were publicly displayed in the Forum. When law is written and placed before the people, it forces power to take form. Britannica emphasizes that recording the law enabled plebeians to learn it and to protect themselves against patrician abuses. A society accustomed to reading law thinks differently. It relies less on favor and more on right. Disputes gain a path: articles, procedures, judgments. And when people trust that problems can be settled by process, they are less tempted to seek escape through impulse. This is the piece of predictability, the quiet foundation of imperial life across generations. But written law is not enough. What matters is how it is operated. In the imperial era, legal procedure increasingly moved toward what Britannica calls cognitio extraordinaria, more power concentrated in the magistrate and courts, summons issued by the court, trials held exclusively before the magistrate, the court responsible for execution of sentence, and the development of an appeal system. That shift produces a double psychology. On one side, it promises efficiency. Disputes travel straighter lines with fewer detours. On the other, it reminds us that empires tend to gather power in order to keep the rhythm. For ordinary people, entering court means learning the language of the state: files, deadlines, evidence. From there, the imperial mindset becomes plain: turn emotion into procedure, instability into schedule. So society runs in silence and power endures as something taken for granted. When disputes have a court, an empire still needs something deeper: counting people. In Rome, the office of the censor began with registering citizens and their property, then expanded into assessing wealth for taxation and overseeing public life. Under Augustus, population counting returned in a new form. Britannica notes that in 28 BCE Octavian and Agrippa conducted a census. The psychology of living in a society that is counted is different. You are not merely a name in a village. You are an entry in a ledger. Rights and obligations travel with numbers. The empire stabilizes itself by letting each person feel he stands inside an order: rank, tax, privilege, duty. When that order repeats year after year, people adjust themselves to fit the system, even when no one stands beside them to command. Watch how Rome trains order in the military camp. Britannica describes the castra as protected by ramparts and ditches, tied together by straight roads that let legions move fast. The core is not only defense but habit. On unfamiliar ground, soldiers raise a rectangle with gates, an axis, designated places for supply and command. Space becomes a diagram. The diagram becomes discipline. Where you sleep, eat, train, each has its place. That psychology does not stop in the ranks. Once people grow used to straight lines and fixed positions, they begin to apply it to life: arranging, anticipating, complying. The empire appears like a coordinate grid laid over the world, and within that grid, many feel calm because they know exactly where they stand. If the camp is the geometry of order, the legion is the rhythm of order. Britannica reminds us that a legion is not merely a unit, but a whole system Rome used to conquer and govern the ancient world. In tactics, Britannica portrays the legion as tightly coordinated smaller blocks, operating as a team, valuing harmony of motion over solitary bursts. This is the empire's psychological lesson. Durable strength is not found in one exceptional man, but in the repetition of training. Men can be replaced. The beat remains. A battle may be lost. The structure still stands. When the public sees ranks marching evenly, camps rising evenly, commands obeyed evenly, they believe the state can organize itself. That belief becomes the quiet adhesive that holds society inside the frame, without needing to shout. In moments of danger, the imperial mindset appears as bodily reflex, the testudo. At Carrie, Britannica describes Roman troops forming a defensive testudo, interlocking shields, to blunt volleys of arrows. The principle is clear. Each person gives up a portion of sight and freedom so the group can be safer. The testudo is no miracle. It demands synchronized steps, and that density reduces speed. Yet psychologically, it says what Rome wants to plan. When the world strikes from every direction, the answer is not to scatter, but to lock into shape. The empire endures because it persuades people that survival is collective work, and the collective needs discipline as surely as it needs breath. Discipline is not only formation, it is also how Rome cares for its human capital. At Pompeii, the house of the surgeon is linked to an excavated set of instruments, scalpels, forceps, hooks, probes, direct evidence of Roman medical practice. What matters is standardization. Each tool has a defined function, requiring steady skill and precise work habits. For the army, this is governance. The soldier trusts that if he falls, the system still has competent hands waiting. That trust reduces panic and increases the chance of returning to the line. On the psychological level, battlefield medicine teaches a larger idea. Even the body can be organized through skill, tools, and procedure. The empire touches life with the hand of technique. An empire that wants to last does not only measure land, it measures time. The Julian calendar reform, introduced by Julius Caesar in 46 BCE, aimed to bring the calendar back toward the seasons and solar markers. Britannica notes that to correct the drift, 46 BCE was lengthened through added days and months to realign the calendar with a natural cycle. It sounds dry, but its impact on the mind is deep. Once the calendar stabilizes, appointments become a foundation of discipline. Taxes by term, court by date, festivals by season. Time stops being a vague current. It is partitioned like a granary, and each partition has someone accountable. Living long inside a shared frame of time, people begin to see their lives as a chain of markers, due on time by the calendar. It is soft discipline, yet more enduring than oaths, because it repeats every day. Once time is set in a mold, Romans also wanted indoor climate to be set in a mold. The hypocaust, an open space beneath the floor heated by hot gases from a furnace, warming the room above, is a defining example. This comfort is a statement. Human experience can be redesigned. In the baths, warmth belongs to ritual. At home, it belongs to dignity. The psychology that follows is unmistakable. When the floor warms at will, you begin to believe many hardships can be solved by engineering, given organization and resources. And as that belief spreads, society demands the state deliver elsewhere as well: roads, water, law, security. Empires live on expectation. Expectation is fed by small comforts, small, but persuasive. Comfort requires resources, and resources pull the empire down into the earth. Las Medulas is a witness. UNESCO states that in the 1st century CE, Roman imperial authorities exploited gold deposits. They're using a technique based on hydraulic power. After roughly 2 centuries they withdrew, leaving a dramatically altered landscape. Psychologically, the gold mine exposes the empire's engine. The empire needs metal to mint money, pay wages, build works, and sustain trust, so it turns water, canals, reservoirs, and labor into a production line. Those living near the channels learn a cold truth. Rome can move hills by plan. When you believe the state is strong enough to reshape terrain, you also believe it is strong enough to reshape your life for good or ill. This is the shadow side of legacy. Glory arrives with the imprint of power on the land. From gold in the ground, we come to gold in the hand, coinage, the breath of trust. Britannica notes that under Augustus, 27 BCE, 14 CE, the coinage was based on the gold aureus, equivalent to 25 silver denarii. Those numbers are not only accounting, they are psychology. A standardized coin lets buyer and seller trust the exchange, even when they do not trust each other. When pay, taxes, and prices all return to familiar units, society begins to think in calculation rather than oath. The empire understands that unity is not only army or law. It is the fact that you can hold the same silver far away and still be accepted. This is the empire in the pocket, a small emblem, laying the groundwork for calm in everyday life. If money produces trust, goods produce habit. Glassblowing is an example. The Metropolitan Museum notes that glassblowing developed in the Syro-Palestinian region in the early 1st century BCE and is thought to have come to Rome after the region's annexation to the Roman world in 64 BCE, revolutionizing production and expanding forms. The psychology of a transparent material is distinctive. Glass lets you see what is inside, creating a sense of cleanliness and verifiability. In urban life, bottles, cups, and jars become signs of a world being standardized. Empires live by standards, but standards must be liked. Glass teaches people to love the look of order. And when people love order, they more easily accept its price. taxes, discipline, and the steady presence of the state. Alongside glass, ceramics create the empire's everyday rhythm. Terra sigillata, bright red, polished tableware, was used across the Roman Empire from the 1st century BCE to the 3rd century CE. Aretium was an early and famous center of production. A bowl traveling from workshop to a distant provincial table brings a familiar feeling. It seems small, yet psychologically it is large. The empire unifies not only through law, but through sameness and habit. When you eat from the same forms, touch the same smooth surface, you more easily believe you belong to a shared world. Standardization becomes comfort. From there, people more readily accept the obligations attached: taxation, discipline, surveillance. The empire knows to rule long, make daily life feel familiar, and let that familiarity take the shape of order. If terra sigillata is the polite face of standardization, the amphora is its rough backbone. Transport jars carrying olive oil and wine move along sea and river routes, turning urban demand into a managed flow. Research on Dressel 20 amphorae, associated with Bedecan olive oil, highlights large-scale production processes and broad distribution across the empire. Psychologically, amphorae teach people to trust supply chains. When shipments arrive regularly, crowds grow less anxious. When granaries are full, rumor finds less soil. The empire understands that order of mind begins with order of the belly. Here, standardization becomes legacy for archaeology: shapes, stamps, traces, signatures of the system. Each jar says Rome rules not only by command, but by making goods move on the right routes, in the right seasons. A single thread runs through roads, water, law, and money paperwork. An empire cannot remember millions by memory. It needs ledgers and repeated counts. In the residential gesti associated with Augustus, commentary notes that the census had not been taken since 69 BCE, and that the census of 28 BCE likely reflects a broader, more exact enumeration across the empire. For ordinary people, this produces a double feeling: safety and weight. Safety because being named means being recognized. Weight because being named also means you can be summoned, taxed, conscripted. That is the psychology of life under empire. The state can tap your shoulder at any moment, and you gradually adjust so the tap stays light. Pay correctly, do correctly, speak in a proper place. Order enters the person by habit, slowly, steadily. Many Roman mechanisms sound familiar: roads tying center to periphery, law as anchor, records turning population into data, and official dispatches outrunning rumor. Britannica describes the cursus publicus as closely bound to the administrative and military system. Living long inside such a structure, the mind shifts. The world becomes a system that can be anticipated. Anticipation brings peace, but also dependence. When peace comes from the system, you feel uneasy when the system falters. Weak water, broken roads, coinage without a trusted standard, courts that slow. The imperial mindset carries a paradox. It strengthens people through discipline, yet makes them vulnerable to disruption. And at the edge of disruption, a different question begins to emerge. Not what did Rome build, but what did Rome do to the way people imagine tomorrow? So when we look at stone ruins, we should not only ask, when was it built? We should ask, how did it train people to think? Concrete taught belief in endurance. Vaults taught belief in balance. Roads and posts taught belief in punctuality. Water and sewers taught belief in governance. Law taught belief in procedure. The legions taught belief in the collective. But every belief has its cost. When you hand your mind to the rhythm of a system, what happens when that rhythm slows or is cut? Then it is no longer a story about stone, but about people. If you want to continue, subscribe. In the next part, I will take you to a small fault line, a detail that seems trivial, yet enough to reveal the moment when the imperial way of thinking begins to change its color.